Hi, thank you very much for coming to my presentation. My name is Haokun. I'm a rising fourth-year PhD student at Cornell University, majored in applied economics and management. My research interests are applied contract theory in corporate finance and political economy. Today, I will present the joint work with my supervisor, Professor Kaushik Basu, on the power and influence of rating agencies, with insights into their misuse. When we talk about rating agency, first thing come to our mind are possibly the three big rating agencies, Standard & Poor's, Moody's, and Fitch. New York Times columnist Thomas Friedman had noted rather carefully, he once said, there are two superpowers in the world, the United States and Moody's bond rating service. And believe me, sometimes it's not clear who's more powerful. When Standard & Poor's, Moody's, and Fitch publish a credit rating, of course, people would expect that they want to have a better face and get a higher rating. Once it is downgraded, they would call the rating agency and figure out why it is downgraded. However, in fact, the rating is quite popular in our life. It is not just for credit rating. For instance, a school, a product, even a person, even a country, they could all get rated. This time, in our paper, we will specifically focus on the World Bank's ease of doing business ranking. The ease of doing business ranking is the World Bank's one of its, and possibly it is the most important publication, specifically focusing on country rating. It is an index that measures how easy to do a business in a specific country, which is published in the last day of October each year. The World Bank's ease of doing business, I get the insight when I talked to my supervisor during the time he was the chief economist at the World Bank. He noticed that once the ease of doing business gets published, all the countries that get downgraded would immediately call the World Bank, and it has triggered a few politics discussion. And then one thing come to my supervisor's mind at that time is, what is the magic behind the World Bank ease of doing business? As an economist, there are some things that we are clearly understand. For instance, a huge fiscal deficit is not good. A super high interest rate would possibly cause the economy to shut down. However, here, when it comes to the World Bank, there are so many things like, what would be the minimum wage? Like, relax the ease of starting a business. Is that really good or not that good? There are certain things that economists are not quite sure about the exact threshold. However, the World Bank would claim, like other rating agencies, they claim they know all of it, and they know what are the optimal, and they started to publish their rating. And then investors or other readers would have started to follow them. In the end, it turned out their rating worked quite well. And so what's the magic behind it? Well, from this paper, we started from an opposite angle. That is, perhaps the rating agency would not have some secret magic or know some inside information. What they did was basically like a commitment device, a coordinate device, sorry, that coordinated the investors together and invest in a specific country so that the return gets higher. For example, the ease of doing business, what do the people do is they basically, the World Bank researcher would get into the country and read the law book, and they would check the law terms and to figure out what are the conditions to do a business and measure the environment. Most of the things from the law book, they are public information. There's nothing secret there. So here in this model, in this story, in this project, I would start to talk about our logic and our thinking. So some stylized facts for empirical intuition. I checked the World Bank Ease of Doing Business score for the past 1 decade. I estimated from the 120 days before the World Bank announcing the credit rate, the Ease of Doing Business score. And then I checked the post-event window for 3 days, 5 days, and 10 days. I noticed that specifically after control the economy fixed effect and year fixed effect, on average, for the first 3 days after the announcing of Ease of Doing Business report, the 1% increase in the doing business score would lead to 2.37% increase for the stock market index, which is very significant. And 5 days later, this effect would goes to a lower scale, and 10 days later, this thing disappears. And this is possibly because of the other noisy term kicks in during this event window. But specifically right after the announcing of the Ease of Doing Business, we can see this effect clearly. An interesting thing is, during these 3 days, short period of window, the country would not change anything, possibly would not change much, they may change something slightly, but the most fundamental in that country would not change. Basically, it's just the rating agency announced that this rating. So how come a World Bank announcing across more than 200 nations have that kind of strong impact? Now I will present our model, theoretical model, to analyze this phenomena. Suppose there is a set of nations with a lowercase n and n greater than or equals to 2, where there are also 2 partitions with n1 nation with strong fundamentals and n2 nation have weak fundamentals. Let gamma denote the ratio between the n1 over n. That is, suppose you randomly flip a coin into this set of nations. With the gamma probability, you would invest it into a good nation. And there are a set of investors with 1 to t and t greater than or equals to 2. For the return function, let's consider a nation I, which is one of the n nations. Suppose M1 other investors invest in I in that nation, and the return earned by each investor are Ri, and Ri is a function of lowercase r, with a function which is a function of Mi plus the fundamental. The Rmi is the return from the numbers of investors, which later I will discuss the feature of the lowercase rmi, plus x and y, where x is greater than y. That is, suppose other things being the same, investing in a nation with strong fundamentals, which gives x, that would give an additional return to investing in a nation with a weak fundamental, which only gives y. That is, the gap between x and y is greater than 0. Suppose the rating agency uses only 2 ratings, A and B. And rating A means, in the opinion of the rating agency, this country has strong fundamentals. And the rating agency tries to guess the partition of N1 and N2. There is no moral hazard here, where the rating agency just try to guess his information, just try to guess which country has a strong fundamental and a weak fundamental, then he will honestly review his guess. Our assumption 1 is the strategical complementarity. That is, suppose M prime is greater than M prime prime, Rm prime greater than Rm prime prime. That is, suppose in a nation there are more investors, where compared to a nation with less investors, the return would be higher. This intuition comes from the one of the intuitive explanation for this assumption is, for instance, you want to go to a country to invest a hotel, where you compare to the situation that you are the unique investor in a country that invested in a hotel. But for the other country that you invested in a hotel, where there are other investors that investor one invested a railroad, the other investor invested a school, some other investor invested a hospital, the return by investing in that for that hotel would be higher in the later case. Consider a specific case that is, suppose all investors invest in one country, the return would be RT, where there is a single country with only R1 investor. And the gap between the RT and R1 is greater than X and Y. When this condition 2 is satisfied, our theorem 1 tells that if a rating agency rates any nation I as A, then if all the investors are guided by this rating and choose to invest in this nation I, and no one would unilaterally deviate, because that investor would earn a strictly lower return by deviating from this country, which is a focal point created by the rating agency. And please note that this is compatible with the rating agency giving an A rating to a country in N2, which is the rating agency randomly gave an A rating to a bad nation. The investor would also not regret when condition 2 is satisfied. Of course, this strategical complementarity may be a strong assumption. Here, we are considering a more general case that is an inverse U-shaped return function. For instance, there is a single peaked return function at D, where the horizontal line is the numbers of investors investing in a specific nation, and the vertical line is a lowercase r, the return function. With the single peaked function, we can say the optimal rating would be give T over D nation for with A rating. This require an additional assumption, that is a uniformly distributed investors. That is, suppose there are mu nations are given an A rating, and there are K investors decided to invest in this mu nation. Then each nation would get just K over mu investors. And our theorem 2 tells that when the uniformly distributed investors are satisfied, this nation would, the optimal rating is rate T over D nations as A. In this case, the rating agency would guarantee that the return for each nation is at the peak D, and no one would unilaterally deviate in this case as well. In our model, in our paper, we also discussed the case where there are multiple rating agencies, and when the rating agency and the investor have some private belief about the nation. Because of the time constraint, I would stop here. And please feel free to email us if you have any comments or feedbacks. Many thanks again for coming to my presentation. Thank you.